Hey guys, it's Amanda. Welcome back to my channel. I'm sorry I've been away for a really long time. It has been like 8 months since I last posted something, which isn't great, but you know, we're here now and life kind of got in the way. So today you'll notice, one, I've already got a face full of makeup on, and that's because I've got like 16 pages to get through. I didn't want the distraction of makeup. I'm also in my living room and it's probably going to be noisy. There's people outside and I can't control that, so you know what, we're just going to have to push forward with it. So today we are going to be talking about the Night Stalker, or his real name is Richard Ramirez. Richard Ramirez is a notorious serial killer from the 1980s. He ended up being known globally and he terrified residents of California and surrounding areas between late 1984 and 1985 until his eventual capture. As usual, I mean, there's going to be a lot of glancing down in this video because there's a lot of information to get through. I'm going to try and keep it as short as possible, but there's a lot. We'll go into a bit of a backstory because I feel with a case like this one you have to. So Richard Ramirez was born on the 29th of February 1960. His mother and father, Mercedes and Julian Ramirez, they were immigrants from Mexico. Back in Mexico, Julian was a police officer. There was 5 children altogether, Richard being the youngest. And when they moved to the States, they moved to El Paso in Texas. His father did not continue as a police officer. He got a job as a labourer. Although that didn't deter from his work ethic, he was a very hard-working man and he worked for his family basically. Now, Julian Ramirez was prone to fits of rage and he would take that out on his wife and his children, which is always the way, isn't it? That is always how these things seem to start. But it wasn't all down to Julian. Richard had a really rough upbringing. At the age of 2, Richard had a dresser fall on top of him. It knocked him unconscious and it created a really deep gash on his forehead. Then at the age of 5, he suffered another head injury when his sister, who was using a swing, actually hit him with it, again knocking him unconscious, causing another laceration to his head. After this incident, Richard, he started experiencing signs of epilepsy and he would frequently have seizures. Now, there's a lot of evidence that states that head injuries are a contributing factor to a person committing murder or becoming a serial killer, with many killers such as John Wayne Gacy, Ed Gein, Richard Berkowitz, I can never say his name, that guy, and Dennis Rader. Dennis Rader is the BTK killer, if you're not familiar with his actual name. There are many others who had head injuries and then went on to be serial killers. So it's not just these ones that I've listed. It just seems to be a running trend here. So I guess stop dropping kids on their head. I mean, no way condoning this as reasoning or being sympathetic towards the fact that these people ended up the way that they did. There's no excuse for this kind of behaviour. I am going to put a little disclaimer out for this one as well. I should probably do it at the beginning of all of my videos. This one in particular, it's very heavy. It's not for the faint-hearted, and there's going to be a lot of talk of rape, murder, obviously, crime scenes, mutilation, that kind of thing. It's definitely one to proceed with caution with. So as the years go by, Richard turns 12 years old and his cousin Miguel, he actually comes back from serving in the Vietnam War and he moves in with the Ramirez family. Miguel and Richard became best friends. Miguel was incredibly messed up. He raped, murdered and mutilated a lot of Vietnamese women while he was over there. he also took photographic evidence of the terrible crimes that he committed, and he showed them to Richard from the age of 12. Richard, being a young and impressionable boy, he couldn't show any fear for the things that he was being shown. He bragged about it and joked about it with Miguel and liked it. It's also believed that Miguel taught Richard some of the military training that he would have been familiar with and that he would have used in Vietnam. So when Richard turns 13, he is still hanging out with Miguel. Miguel has actually moved out of the Ramirez family's home and he's now married and living with his wife, Jessie. They didn't have a particularly great marriage. There was a lot of fighting, a lot of confrontation. One day, Miguel snapped. He got into an altercation with Jessie and he actually ended up shooting her in the face while Richard was there. I think because of everything that Richard had already seen, he'd already become quite desensitized to this sort of thing, and it didn't affect him. He just sat there and acted like nothing had happened. Later, when Richard was captured and interviewed, he actually went as far as to say that he didn't find the murder traumatizing at all, but in fact found it fascinating. Now, Miguel was arrested, however, he was found not guilty due to reason of insanity. Instead, he spent just 4 years at a mental institution. After Richard witnessed the shooting, he didn't go back home to his parents' house, so instead he moved in with his sister Ruth and her husband. You would think that maybe things might start looking up for Richard, however, Ruth's husband, Roberto, was a peeping Tom. He and Richard then banded together and they would go on nighttime expeditions, creep into people's gardens and look at women when they were bathing or getting changed, getting ready for bed, being complete and utter creeps. And because Miguel only spent 4 years in a mental institution, he was then a free man. So when Miguel was released, he would then go along with them and the three of them would do this disgusting behaviour between them. By the age of 14, Richard was already using drugs like LSD and cocaine. So Richard is still very close with Miguel, and it's around this time that he started exploring Satanism. This, along with his twisted sexual fantasies, all with thanks to Miguel, was really paving the way for him in life. So when he was still at school, he took a part-time job at a Holiday Inn, where he took full advantage of this. He was given a pass key which gave him access to every room. So Richard began to break into people's rooms at night. I say break in, he let himself in, he had the damn key. He would let himself into their rooms while they were sleeping and he'd rob them. So as time went on, I think robbing people wasn't quite scratching the itch for him. So he then went on to molest 2 children in an elevator. This never got reported to police though. Because Richard didn't get in trouble for that first crime, he let himself into another room and here he attempted to sexually assault a woman while she was sleeping. Whilst the confrontation was happening, the woman's husband actually entered the room, who then proceeded to beat the crap out of Ramirez, naturally, as any normal person would do. The charges actually got dropped. The couple, they didn't live in the area, and they basically didn't want the hassle of having to drive backwards and forwards in and out of state to attend a court hearing. Now, because of this, he obviously lost his job and thinks at the same time that now is a good time to drop out of school. Now, from this point up until the age of around 22, there's not a great deal known about Ramirez. He got involved in a lot of petty crimes, theft, Grand Theft Auto, that kind of thing. He also got arrested and he was imprisoned for stealing a car at one point. There was a brief time where he lived in San Francisco in the Tenderloin area where he had been staying in a hotel. So this is where things are going to start getting a bit rough. This crime he never actually got convicted of until I think it was 2009, because evidence just wasn't as sophisticated back then. So Richard Ramirez's first victim was a 9-year-old girl. She was looking for money that she had dropped, and Ramirez managed to lure her into the basement of the hotel by saying that he'd help her find the money. He then proceeded to brutally attack the girl. He beat her, raped her, and strangled her. He then proceeded to stab her until she was no longer breathing. When she had died, he took off her blouse and tied it around her wrists and then hung her body from a pipe. After this attack, Ramirez then headed back to LA. On June the 28th, 1984, he broke into the home of a 79-year-old woman called Jenny. It was summer and it was hot, so Jenny had left her window open and he removed a mesh panel from in front of the window to be able to get into the property. He crept into her bedroom where he then repeatedly stabbed her in her head, neck and chest while she was sleeping. At this point, she was already deceased. However, what he did next doesn't make that any better. He then proceeded to slash her throat with such force that he nearly decapitated her. After he'd killed Jenny, he then burgled her. He took items, money, jewellery, things like that. He left the property the same way that he came in, and he actually left a fingerprint on the mesh panel of the window. But back then, fingerprints weren't a thing. They didn't actively have a section where they were held on record. So there's a bit of a gap now between Jenny's murder and the next murder that he commits. I'm going to fast forward to March 1985. The next attack was on a 22-year-old woman called Maria. Maria had just pulled up and was pulling her car into the garage when Richard ran up to her, pointed a .22 caliber handgun in her face, pulled the trigger, and miraculously, as Maria pulled her hands to her face to protect herself, she'd also got her car keys in her hands. The bullet ricocheted off the car key, which saved her life. Now, she didn't want to show this to Richard, so she fell to the floor and acted as though she'd been shot. Richard then proceeded to go into the property. Unfortunately, Maria's roommate Dale was not so lucky. She was in the house at the time and she heard the gunshot. She hid behind one of the kitchen counters, but when Richard entered the kitchen, she looked up over the counter and he shot her in the head, which killed her instantly. Unbelievably, after committing these two crimes, he then goes and commits another crime on the same night. Ramirez drags a 30-year-old woman from her car in Monterey Park. The woman's name was Veronica. Ramirez shot her twice and then ran on foot from the scene. Veronica was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. Because of these two murders in one night, it began to generate some media attention. So Maria, the surviving victim, she did give a description of Richard to the authorities. She described him as being a young male in his 20s with curly hair. She explained that he had bulging eyes and badly rotting teeth. Now, if you already know who Richard Ramirez is, you are going to be very well aware of the way that his teeth looked. They were disgusting. I will insert a picture. Disgusting. 10 days later, on March the 27th, Richard returned to a home that he'd burgled previously. home to a 64-year-old man named Vincent in Whittier, California, and his wife Maxine. Ramirez went straight for the bedroom where he shot Vincent in his sleep. The gunshot woke Maxine up. Ramirez then proceeded to bind her and beat her. He then went about the house trying to find valuable possessions that he could steal. In this time, Maxine managed to free herself from the bonds, and she grabbed a shotgun that her husband kept under the bed. Ramirez comes back into the bedroom. Maxine points the shotgun at him, pulls the trigger. Nothing happens. The shotgun wasn't loaded. This infuriated Richard. He then shot her 3 times, mutilated her body with a knife, repeatedly stabbed her, and then proceeded to gouge both of her eyes out. He then placed her eyes in a jewellery box and took that with him when he left. I don't know why. Their bodies were discovered the following day by one of Vincent's colleagues. Richard actually left a shoe print in the flower beds when he was leaving this house. So a cast was made of the shoe print, and they also found the spent gun casings, which they took with them. On analysing those, they found that they matched the previous attacks. So it's at this point that the police realise that they do in fact have a serial killer to catch. On the 14th of May, Ramirez returns to Monterey Park. He enters the home of 66-year-old Bill, where he cared for his disabled wife. He heads to the bedroom. Bill hears this and he tries to get his own gun from in one of the bedside drawers. There's then a bit of a scuffle between the two of them. Ramirez then shoots Bill in the face and continues to beat him. He then goes on to Bill's wife Lillian's room where she had been sleeping. He binds her to the bed and he rapes her, trashing the house and stealing any valuables he can find. Unfortunately, Bill did pass away in hospital from his injuries. After stealing a car, Ramirez then breaks into the home of Mabel, 83, and her sister Florence on May the 29th. Richard manages to find a hammer in their kitchen. He first binds Florence and bludgeons her before moving on to Mabel. He does the same to Mabel that he did to Florence. He then comes across an electrical cord and he decides he's going to use this to shock both of the women. I genuinely have no idea why. He then rapes Florence. He draws a pentagram on Mabel's thigh in lipstick and also draws a pentagram on the bedroom walls. It took 2 days before Mabel and Florence were eventually found. Miraculously, they were both still alive. They were in a coma-like state, and unfortunately, Mabel did pass away from her injuries in hospital. The next day, Ramirez drove to Burbank, where he broke into 42-year-old Carol's house. Carol also lived with her 11-year-old son. Ramirez uses thumb cuffs to bind them both. He then ushers Carol around the house at gunpoint, demanding she show him where the valuables are. He then repeatedly raped her. He threatened to cut her eyes out if she looked at him. Just completely unbelievable, really. When he was finished this disgusting attack, he then tied them both together and left. On the 2nd of July, Ramirez drove to Arcadia, where he broke into 75-year-old Mary's home. While she was sleeping, he beat her into unconsciousness. He actually used the bedside lamp to do this. He then went to the kitchen where he retrieved a knife and repeatedly stabbed her. She was found she unfortunately was already deceased. I have a radiator bed right by where I've got the camera set up, which means the cat is now going to try and get onto that radiator bed. You happy? Just to pre-warn you, you're probably going to hear some snoring now. On the 5th of July, Ramirez broke into a home in Sierra Madre where he came across a 16-year-old girl called Whitney. He beat Whitney with a tire iron while she slept. He was unable to locate a knife in the kitchen, so he returned to the bedroom where he strangled Whitney with the telephone cord. In a later interview, he actually stated how the telephone cord had begun to emit sparks, which panicked him. Whitney actually started to breathe again, and Ramirez believed that this was the work of Jesus Christ and believed that he was trying to stop Ramirez from committing this crime. Again, amazingly, Whitney did survive. She required hundreds of stitches to her wounds. On July the 7th, Ramirez then returned to Monterey Park. That seems to be his favourite place. He broke into the home of 60-year-old Joyce, where he found her asleep on the sofa, not in a bed this time. He pushed her off the sofa, and then he repeatedly stamped on her face. He did this until she was no longer breathing. However, when police attended the crime scene, he had left a clear shoe print on the poor woman's face, which actually matched the previous print that they retrieved. On the same night, Ramirez went in search of another victim. However, he returned back to Monterey Park. He broke into the house of 63-year-old Sophie. Here, he attempted to rape her. He handcuffed her and held her at gunpoint. He made her swear to Satan to show him where all the valuables were and that there was nothing else of value for him to take. While the crimes were being committed, there were 2 detectives that were put on this case. The first detective is Gil Camillo, who was partnered with Frank Salerno. The 2 worked tirelessly to get to the bottom of this. While they were going through the evidence, they started to notice similarities between previous cases and so forth. They determined that this was just one man working alone, and the story had begun to make not just news in America, but global news. The residents of California and the surrounding areas are being advised to keep their windows and doors closed and locked. They were even told, if they could, to get guard dogs to patrol around their property to act as a deterrent. And they were urged to report anything that appeared out of the ordinary, no matter how small it was by this point. Soon a report of an attempted abduction came in from Eagle Rock, where Ramirez had attacked a woman. She had fought back, and he then fled in a Toyota. The Toyota was then spotted by a police officer when he saw a traffic violation being committed. He pulled the Toyota over. However, Ramirez managed to escape on foot, but not before drawing a pentagram onto the windshield of the car. The car was immediately impounded, which meant the police could not search it or run it for fingerprints, which was incredibly frustrating for the 2 detectives working on the case. Now, you'd think that this might perhaps make Ramirez slow down a little bit, but no. Why would he do that? Now he decides is as good a time as any to go out and buy a machete. So this is something that I've never really understood, is how you can just go out and buy a machete. Like, you shouldn't be able to just go out and do that, should you? That to me just does not make sense. I mean, how do you not log these sales? You don't take names or anything like that. Just, oh, you came for a machete? Have a good day. It's now the 20th of July and Ramirez now drives to Glendale, California. He breaks into the home of 66-year-old Leela, I think her name is, and her husband Max. He was armed with the machete, so he barges into their room and then hacks at them while they're sleeping. And because that wasn't enough, he then decided to shoot both of them in the head, killing them. Afterwards, he continued to mutilate the bodies and stole all their valuables. He then drove to Sun Valley, where he broke into another house, and this was a family of 3. You will have to forgive me with the pronunciation of these names. The husband, Chainarong, was shot and killed instantly. His wife, Somkid, was repeatedly raped, bound and beaten. He then bound and beat their 8-year-old son. Somkid was dragged through the house at gunpoint while Ramirez demanded to know the location of valuables and money. He made her swear to Satan that she wasn't keeping any money from him. Somkid and her son both survived. Later, she went on to report of his terrible, putrid breath and bad teeth. On the 6th of August, Ramirez breaks into Chris and Virginia's house. He breaks in and goes straight to their bedroom, where he shoots Virginia in the face. He then attempts to leave. While struggling to leave, he shoots Chris in the neck. On the 8th of August, he steals yet another car and he drives to Diamond Bar, California. He enters the home of a 27-year-old Sakina and her husband Elias. He does the usual routine. He breaks in and he goes straight to the bedroom, shoots Elias in the head, which kills him straight away. He handcuffs Sakina to the bed, where he beats her until she gives away where the valuables are kept. He then brutally and repeatedly raped her while he beat her and demanded that she swear to Satan that they aren't hiding any more valuables. While the attack was happening, Sakina's 3-year-old son woke up from the noise and he entered Sakina's room. Although Ramirez didn't hurt her son, he did tie him up. He held a knife to his throat and to his chest and demanded that Sakina swear to Satan that there were no more valuables. He then continued to rape Sakina while her son was in the room. So by this point, the media had started to nickname Ramirez the Night Stalker, but he was following the media coverage. At this point, he decided he was going to travel back to San Francisco. On the 18th of August, he broke into Peter and Barbara's house. He shot Peter in the head and killed him, and then continued to beat and rape Barbara. He shot her in the head and then left her for dead. He also drew a pentagram on the walls and wrote the expression "Jack the Knife" in lipstick. When leaving the property, he left another shoe print. The detectives had started doing a little bit of background into the shoe print that was left. It transpired that they came from a specific pair of Avia sneakers. There was only about 1 pair sold in Ramirez's size, which is 11.5 in the Los Angeles area. So Ramirez was the only person that ever bought those shoes in LA. This was a breakthrough in the case, and for some unknown reason, the mayor of San Francisco then decided to hold a televised press conference. She stated the findings with the shoes. As you can imagine, the detectives were absolutely furious by what she'd done. They knew that Ramirez was watching the news, and it comes at no surprise that he then disposed of those shoes. It gave him the upper hand to dispose of anything that he might have had at that point that could be used against him as evidence if he was caught. He later told interviewers that those shoes ended up over the Golden Gate Bridge. On the 24th of August, Ramirez was spotted loitering outside a house. He was seen by a boy who was 13 years old called James. James immediately told his parents, who obviously alerted the police. Now, as Ramirez was fleeing the scene, James managed to get a good look at the vehicle. So he got the vehicle make, the vehicle colour, and he also managed to get part of the license plate, which was then passed over to the authorities. On the same night, Ramirez then broke into the home of Bill and Inez. It was actually the noise of Ramirez cocking his pistol that woke Bill. He then shot Bill 3 times in the head, and then he moved on to Inez. He bound her, beat her, the usual that he does. He dragged her to a different room where he then raped her, again demanding to know where the valuables were. When he left, he turned to Inez and said, "Tell them the Night Stalker was here." I don't know how, but the surgeons that worked on Bill, they managed to get 2 of the bullets out of his skull and he survived. On the 28th of August, the stolen car that was impounded, the police finally managed to get a hold of it. From that, they managed to obtain a single fingerprint. Now, fingerprinting, although it had been around for a while, they didn't have a system that was sophisticated enough to keep a record of all those prints. And they only had fingerprints on record of people born after the 1st of January 1960. Ramirez was born in February 1960. So amazingly, they had his fingerprint on file from the previous time that he was arrested, which meant after a ridiculous amount of weeks of torture and torment and just utter chaos, they positively identified him. And so the following day, the police released his mugshot from his previous arrest. He was broadcast everywhere. They held another televised press conference, and in that conference, the detectives turned to the camera and said, "We know who you are now, and soon everyone else will. There will be no place you can hide." They stated this because they knew that Ramirez was watching the news and keeping on top of his own case. On August the 31st, Richard Ramirez walked into a convenience store in LA. A group of Hispanic elderly women saw him and began pointing and shouting "El Matador." El Matador roughly translates to the killer in Spanish. It was at that point that Ramirez turned and saw his own face on the newspapers. He ran. He ran and attempted a carjacking. He jumped into an unlocked Ford Mustang. However, a neighbour dragged him back out of it. He then ran to the car's owner in an attempt to try and obtain the keys from her. Her husband, witnessing the attack, then tackled Ramirez. He hit Ramirez over the head with a fence post. A group of 10 or so residents then chased him through Hubbard Street in Boyle Heights, where they managed to get him to the ground. They beat the crap out of him, as I think anybody would. They held him down and eventually the police were called and Ramirez was taken into custody. He was amazingly unarmed, although not looking too hot. So the trial didn't start until 1988. Ramirez showed no remorse whatsoever. He was arrogant, cocky, obnoxious. On the first day in court, he took the stand, held his hand out, and had drew a pentagram on his palm, and he yelled, "Hail Satan," to the cameras. At one point, it was announced that Ramirez was planning to shoot the prosecutor and that he was going to have a gun smuggled into the courtroom. At this point, everybody was being searched and metal detectors were also installed. On the 14th of August, the trial was delayed as one of the jurors didn't attend court that day. She was found the same day in her apartment. She'd been killed. It was determined that it was not related to Ramirez. This terrified the rest of the jurors and everyone began to feel unsafe. Finally, on the 20th of September 1989, after a ridiculously long and drawn out court case, Richard Ramirez was convicted of 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. During his penalty hearing in November, he was sentenced to death by gas chamber in the state of California. Richard, not so bothered. His answer, or his response, was,
"Big deal. That's always went with the territory. I'll see you in Disneyland."
What an asshole. Again, he showed no remorse to any of the victims' families, friends. He was completely unfazed by what he was being charged with. He would stare at people during court in an attempt to intimidate them and make them scared of him. He would snigger and smile and laugh, and even wore sunglasses towards the end of the court case. He was just evil. Oh, what a horrible man. Now, something that always happens in these kind of cases, which I will never understand, is the fan base and following of supporters that these people end up with. What I can only think of as completely mentally deranged women who sexualized him and thought he was handsome and sexy, and they didn't believe that somebody that looked this good could have done these disgusting things. And then you look at him. How could anybody find this attractive? They would send him letters and pictures, and they'd be explicit pictures. They'd have, no top on, they'd be posing seductively, and, he was probably loving it. He actually married a woman called Doreen Leoy, I believe she's called. They were married on the 3rd of October 1996 at California's San Quentin State Prison. The bastard even got some new teeth. Doreen was a virgin. They were not allowed conjugal visits. They weren't allowed those, so they, thank God, never got to do that. And Doreen was, I guess, just a little fuck up. She actually said that when Ramirez receives the death sentence that she would commit suicide. The marriage didn't actually last. So remember the first murder that he committed, the one for the 9-year-old girl. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, he wasn't convicted of this until 2009. DNA evidence proved that it was Ramirez that killed her. This is what led Doreen to leave Richard. This is what pushed her over the edge. Not the 13 other murders that he's been convicted of. He actually got engaged again. There was another crazy person who wanted to be with this man. She was 23. They never married, thank God. He didn't deserve it. And in 2013, Ramirez died. It was due to complications of secondary B-cell lymphoma. Cancer got the bastard. So it wouldn't have been a quick and easy way to go, let's say. He suffered. And I'm glad for that. Oh, and hepatitis. Hepatitis C from all the drugs that he'd done previously. So, bye Richard. He was 53 years old at the time of his death. The things that this guy did are unbelievably evil and shocking. It's believed the actual number of murders are well into the 20s, with a potential of many more attacks that have just gone unreported. I guess we will never know the true extent of his crimes. So that was heavy. How are you all feeling after that? I think we all need a bit of a relaxing rest of the day now. As always, guys, I just want to say a big thank you for watching this video and supporting me, and if you did enjoy it, please consider giving me a subscribe. That'd be really good. And who knows when the next time I upload will be. I'm no good at this. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye. I've done that whole video and I look like absolute shite. Blah.